Hi, this is Patricia Stepler, and I want to welcome you to Your Inside Power, part of Win-Win Women. And today's topic is how we have focus we call into existence. You know, how many times in our lives do we think about something and not realize that whether we want that or don't want that, we actually call it into our existence. So one of the books I've read lately is called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And in this, he talks about physics. And, you know, we have here that quantum physics tells us that the universe emerged from thought. Can you imagine it? The thought, whatever source energy, God, infinite intelligence, whatever you call it, thought about it and made it appear. And I remember one time being in a study in my church, and we were asking our minister, well, you know, how did everything happen? He says, you know, it just did. And we said, well, what about God or source energy or infinite intelligence? How did that happen? He says, it just was. And, you know, this is a place where theology and science connect, because that's exactly what a scientist would say. It just is, it just was, it just happened. So it all happened through thought. So whatever you think of that power source that brought that to you and brought the universe to us, that's what we consider it. So when it talks about this quantum physics, and to be honest with you, I didn't even take physics in school, so this is maybe a bit beyond me, but it was talking here about the idea, and it said, you know, years ago, centuries ago, it says the reality was that the world was matter and thought. Early physicists just divided it that way, matter and thought. And then they decided that essentially everything was predetermined and that people could do little to change that, and through their own actions, let alone their thoughts. And I remember one of my earlier shows telling you about a teacher I had when I was in junior high, and, you know, actually speaking to that in her belief system, that everything was predetermined and we really did not have a lot of control. And that was what early, you know, centuries ago they thought. But now the predominant thinking is that we have the power to control our thoughts and to control what happens to us. And so early on in this book, he says, if we truly embrace the notion that our thoughts produce tangible effects in our lives, wouldn't we strive to never let one thought slip by us that we didn't want to experience? And wouldn't we focus our attention on what we want instead of continually obsessing about our problems? You know, that's where my focus was last week. You know, so often we look at what we don't want and we have so much focus on what we don't want. You know, we don't want the empty bank account, but yet we focus on the empty bank account. We don't want the relationship that's not working, but that we focus on that. You know, the other day I was reading about this person who did not like their boss and had these very ill feelings about their boss. And the more they had those feelings, the more they did not like it. And I remembered a time when I was teaching school that I always figured I could outlive my principals that I had to work with. And some of them were excellent and some of them were dreadful. And I think we all see that in bosses. And, you know, 70%, I heard Jack Canfield say this in a CD one time, that 70% of Americans either do not like their job or do not like the person they work for. And then there was a survey that came out saying that 70% of people who switched jobs during the pandemic kind of regret that. But sometimes it's the person we work for or the job we do. And during the times when I was working for a principal who was encouraging and allowed me to step outside of my comfort zone and try something to see if it worked or did not work. And he gave not just myself, but all the staff members the opportunity to grow. and to change and to expand and to do what they thought would be good for kids. And then sometimes we had these tyrants that would come in and, it was their way or no way. And, everybody had to do things the same way. And, everybody has different personalities, teachers, kids, and we can't always do it that way. And so when I had a boss like that or a principal like that I was working for, I did not like my job. And that I remember this one in particular that we absolutely just clashed in many different aspects. And, for her, like it was, I went in when I needed to be there. I left when I needed to be there. I didn't volunteer to do anything extra because I didn't feel like anything I did was appreciated. And yet the next person that came in after her, it was so good. And, I was willing to do all kinds of extra things. And you see, the way we treat people and the way we think about them, because you see, in the back of my mind, I know how I felt about her every time I went into the building and how much I did not like working for her. And I'm sure that impacted my whole thought pattern about the situation. It had to. And then when I had a different administrator I was working for, my whole thoughts changed. So look back in your own life, because I'm sure you can see times where the same thing happened to you. But the question is, why did I allow that to impact my life? Well, first of all, I did not know this information at the time. And secondly, if you know that, here's the next question. If you really knew that this principle is true, that the thoughts you think can alter your life and alter your experiences, would you ever miss a day of intentionally creating your desired destiny? You see, how many days in that 2-year period did I miss because I did not create the destiny that I really wanted? So, that's one of the things we have to think about when we realize that our thoughts are things, and our thoughts can alter our lives, and they can change exactly what you have going on in your life. And your mind has this incredible power to think your life into existence. One time we decided to take our children, who were grown at the time, onto a cruise. And we thought that into existence. We thought about it, we created it. And then as we were on the cruise, the one thing I wanted to do, I have 2 daughters, and I wanted to buy them a piece of jewelry on the cruise. And so we looked for jewelry, and sure enough, we did it. I bought each one of them a beautiful, necklace. And it was something that I thought about. And the funny thing is, when you think about those things and then they happen, it's like you're living it for the second time because you already thought about it once, just like an inventor who thinks of the invention, the problem they want to solve, and they think of that idea in their mind, and then they create it in reality. And when they create it, it's just like just pulling it out of their mind. And so they've already seen it before they actually had it in front of them. They say that Walt Disney, he never lived to see Disney World built, but he was buying up all the land down there in Florida, and he had it on his mind. And one of his employees said to his brother, isn't it a shame he never lived to see it? And he said he saw it. He saw it in his mind. It was all there. And, we have to realize that those thoughts become very powerful. And so what thoughts are you thinking? We need to consciously choose our thoughts. And when we do that, we can absolutely change our lives. And so how important is that to you, to want to change your life by changing the thoughts that you have? And not only changing for your own life, but how could we improve the life of others by changing our thoughts? In this one book I was reading by Neville Goddard, he talked about this lady, and it's similar to the story I was just relating to myself, but she had a problem with her boss, and she didn't think her boss liked her at all. And he never seemed to say anything good to her. And then as the story goes on, he had her change her thinking. And she had started to think good thoughts about her boss and started to hear him saying, what good job she did, and so on and so forth. And sure enough, in a very short amount of time, he started to compliment her on the work that she was doing and how good she was. And it just verified that we can alter our lives by altering our thoughts, and we can impact the world by altering our lives. If we were all focused on a peaceful situation, could that change the way our world looks today? How do we reflect on that? And, I think of that sometimes when there's riots going on, what are people thinking? Well, they get into this vibration. You see, if everything in the world is energy and everything is vibrating, whatever you're in harmony with, or whatever vibration you are in right at that moment, you attract more of that, and you are attracted to more of that. And so, you see riots and they just start, and people are on that same frequency and they get sucked into it. So it's a matter of changing our thoughts and changing those frequencies. So you attract predominantly the thoughts that consciously or unconsciously you are in harmony with. And then you become a reflection of those thoughts. So how do we change some of this? That becomes a really good question. What do we do to change this? How do we change the vibration that you're in? Sometimes when you wake up in the morning, maybe you feel a little sad or a little disappointed, or maybe even a little depressed. And, other days you wake up and you're really happy. Well, what's happening is your mind never sleeps. So thoughts are always spinning around there, 10,000 to 60,000, depending on which authority you look at. Those thoughts are spinning around in your mind. And so when you have predominantly positive thoughts, that's when you wake up feeling really good in the morning. And when you have predominantly negative thoughts going around in your mind, that's when you wake up feeling kind of lousy in the morning. Well, how can we alter that? Because if we can change our lives by changing our thinking, well, certainly we can change how we feel in the morning from, if you're not feeling good, to feeling good. So let's just give you some ideas of how to do that. One of the easiest ways I know is to really start to focus and develop clarity on what your goal is and what kind of life do you want to live. If you can choose, if that's true, if we do have the ability to choose the life we want, then what would it look like? And I suggest you spend some time, give it some thought, and maybe just spend an hour or so writing, what do you really want your life to look like? How many of us go through decades and never really think about what we want to do? We just kind of let the world fall in front of us, and we just do whatever it is that we want to do. And we never give much thought as to what we would really like to have happen in our lives. So what if we could alter that by building this picture of what we want? And I don't mean just your life, but, where do you want to live? What experiences do you want to have? You see, if we can change our thought and create the experiences that we want, what experiences do you want to have? So write this story in detail, as much detail as you can. And of course, you can keep adding to it as you come up with new ideas. And believe me, you will come up with new ideas, because once you start unleashing your imagination that's probably been so trapped for years, once you start unleashing and start allowing your mind to be free to come up with ideas, you will keep coming up with more and more. So create that story of what it is that you want. And then the next time, or do it daily, because it's really a good exercise to do every day, but spend some time just quieting your mind. And, the best time for me to do this is before anybody's up in the house. So everything's quiet. And so you might have to get up a little earlier to do this, but just go and sit very quietly in a room and be very comfortable. And I generally put on some soft music in the background, just to have a sound there, but very subtle. And I rewrite my goal. So after I have my story written, now I figured out, okay, what's my most immediate goal? And so I write that goal down. I also spend some time writing 10 things I'm grateful for. And, it's really easy to find 10 things I'm grateful for and keep switching them up. Sometimes I might start on a topic. I might say, who in my life, what people am I grateful for? And that might be my gratitude for one day. Another time it might be gratitude of, experiences I've had in the past. And then another day it might be, okay, these are the experiences I want to have in the future that I'm grateful for. You see, you can be grateful for something that's already happened, or you can be grateful for the things that are going to happen. So, just write down some gratitude statements, write down your goal, and then sit there quietly. If that hasn't already shifted your vibration, this next part will, but sit there quietly and now close your eyes and go into thought about what your goal looks like once it's accomplished. Hear the conversations that you're having. See people congratulating you on that experience. See how happy your family is for you. Maybe your goal is to go on a trip. And so see yourself visiting the sites that you want to see. And, like maybe you're even smelling the flowers that are there. You see, your imagination can bring that into you. And when I talked on a previous episode about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, your conscious mind can create all these ideas, and that's where all the intellect is. But when we start pushing it into the subconscious mind, that controls our action. And the subconscious mind does not know the difference between imagination and reality. So as you're thinking of this story, thinking of this vision that you have, this beautiful vision that you're creating, your subconscious mind just thinks it's real. And you see, the more you impress that idea into your mind, then the subconscious finds a way to make it happen. Because the subconscious controls your actions. So you're going to start doing different things. And subconscious minds are connected throughout the universe. And so you're going to find people and resources. And, if you need the money, you'll figure out ways to acquire the money that you need to get to your goal. And isn't that a beautiful way to think? And some people might say, oh, it doesn't happen that way. Well, they can think that. But in my experience, it does work that way. And, looking at the experience of my son when he got a scholarship, that's exactly what he did. He just didn't know what he was doing. So you have to go into that, quieting the mind, visualizing what you want, and then you have to believe it's going to happen. Now, what a lot of us do, and I've done this in my past too, and you have this big idea, and then you start putting up all the reasons why it can't happen, or why it won't happen, or why it's impossible, or it won't work for you. Because you remember, we always think other people can do things, but we don't believe we can do it. And so we start to put in that doubt. And, think of that doubt as a guardian that is put there to test you. And just always think of that as a test. And then as soon as that test comes, just like, get out of here. I know I can do it. And then start to shift your vibration. Because when you have those ideas of doubt or worry or self-deprecation, you're actually shifting your vibration and you're pulling it back down to where it was. And we need you to keep that vibration up on the level where the belief is and where the goal is. So one of the most important things you can do is to study. I've listed multiple books as I've gone through these episodes. And the one book that we talked about last week, one of my favorite books, The Science of Getting Rich. Remember, in this book, Wallace D. Wattles talks about his hypothesis as to how all this works. So he says, There's a thinking stuff from which all things are made. The thinking stuff is out in this world all the time. And in its original state, it permeates and penetrates and fills the inner spaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imagined by the thought. So all you have to do is put that thought, you're putting that thought into your subconscious mind. And as you do that, it's permeating through the whole universe. And man can form things in his thought, and by impressing his thought upon formless substance, can cause the thing he thinks about to be created. So as you impress your idea into your subconscious, you're actually permeating that through the world, and then you're causing it to happen. And, this is when I shared the story about my son and getting the scholarship to play baseball in school. He impressed his thought upon the universe. And even though his plan did not work, the universe had the plan that would work. And so because his thought was impressed upon there and he was taking action, the universe responded to him with the appropriate team he needed to be on to get seen to get the scholarship. So we are in control. We control our thoughts, and it's up to us how we want to move forward. So once we study and learn this, that's our first step towards freedom. That's what freedom really is. When we realize that we are in control and we are no longer victims. We are no longer victims by any means. And so we have the power within us. Your inside power, as my show is, your inside power. You have that inside power to control what it is that you want to do. So as we think, so our life becomes. And that's how we start to move through experience to experience. We are in control. So some people might say, well, why do bad things happen to us? And, surely I didn't cause that. Well, this is a kind of a strange story. But one day I was driving down our major highway near us, and I was about ready to get off the exit to come to our house. And I don't know what on earth made me think this, but all of a sudden in my mind came this idea: what would happen if somebody had like a heart attack while they're driving a car? What would go on? And I thought, where on earth did that idea, or where did that thought come from? So I was about at the exit, took the exit, came down the street. And all of a sudden I looked in my rear view mirror, and this car behind me just started drifting right off the road and went right over into a lawn. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I just had this thought about what would it be like if somebody had a heart attack? Did that person have a heart attack? So when I got to my place and could stop, I was ready to call 911 to see, what was going on, which by the time I got there, their sirens were already going. And so somebody else had already discovered somebody in their front yard. But, how did that thought get in my mind? Was somebody having a heart attack, or near a heart attack when we were getting off that exit? And then that's what happened. I don't know, but isn't that bizarre to think that that happened? And, sometimes we have to listen to our voices inside of us. When my daughter was getting ready to move to Florida, and we went and got the U-Haul, and my husband and my granddaughter were going to be in the cab driving down to Florida, and my daughter and I were going to take her car. And so my daughter and I pretty much loaded up this U-Haul with all the boxes and all the furniture that we could lift. And all of a sudden I was going out the front door to go down to our mailbox to get our mail. And something inside of me said, look at the tires. I thought, why would I want to look at the tires? Isn't this kind of a silly thing? Look at the tires. But that was the message I was getting. Look at the tires. And I went out and I looked at the rear tires. Here, the one was sliced. It was just totally split. And, what would have happened had we driven, the 11 or 1200 miles from our house down to where she was moving to in Florida? What could have happened had I not listened to that inner voice saying, look at the tires. And, sometimes I think there's messages out there, but we're not always quiet enough to hear them. And, you can believe what you want to believe. I know what I'm believing. I believe that was a gift to tell me to look at the tires, because it could have saved the life of my daughter or my granddaughter and my husband. And certainly could have saved a really bad accident, being on a major highway, driving at a high speed and a tire blow. So, we have to realize that there's things out there that we don't always understand. And I certainly don't always understand them. But when our mind's quiet enough to be able to hear, the voices coming back to us, it's said that when we pray to God, we're asking for help for something, but our intuitive factor is God's answer to us. And so often our lives become busy and we've got so many thoughts spinning around to them that we never take time to listen. So what if you really can change the events in your life? Did I change that event in the life for my family? I certainly did, because I was willing to listen to what I was being told to do. And, sometimes we have to be aware of that. So Spirit wants us to be more, and it wants us to move to a higher level. And keep in mind that we are living on 3 planes simultaneously. We are a spiritual being in a physical body with an intellect. And so we need to realize that we have those 3 different planes that we're living on at the same time. But Spirit is wanting us to move higher and wanting us to become more spiritual as we grow and expand. And I think that's, when we talk about wisdom and people becoming wiser, I believe that's how we do it, because we start to move to becoming a more spiritual being than when we are younger. So what I want you to do is start to look at your results. And then if it's the result that you really like, well, congratulate yourself, celebrate, because you've done something great with what you've been given. But if it's not the result that you want, then look at your behaviors and what things can you change. And one of the best behaviors I ever did was that little exercise I gave you earlier. When I get up in the morning, even if I'm feeling in a good mood, which I generally am, when I do that exercise of the gratitude, and when I start to think of my goal and rewrite my goal and visualize my goal, I can feel my whole body shifting. And it makes me very anxious to get ready and start my day and to do the activities that will get me the result that I want. So the power of our thought is so powerful that we need to really, get a grasp of it and realize how much our thoughts can impact our lives. So for more information about that, I invite you to get on a call with me and connect with me on social media. And I even have events that are going to be coming up very soon that will enable you to learn more about how to really use this power. And I'm actually going to be giving away some free gifts that if you're interested in the science of getting rich, you will not want to miss this offer. So I'll just put some information here in this event. And I'm also looking for some speakers to be part of my summit. And I would encourage you to go ahead and click on one of those links that we have there. So this is Patricia Stepler with Your Inside Power, where I want you to be the magic and be the magic in your dreams